So it's week 9 and half of this week will be used to master and remix this song, and the other will be used to remix song 1. So to start off, I bounced these all down. I kept them as normal files because if I needed to go back and edit some of the bass or anything, if it was too high in this final mix, then I go back and re-edit it. But for starters, I edited the channel EQ. I boosted the bass a tiny bit and took out some of the bass frequencies around 200 Hz, and then boosted them at 970 Hz. I then boosted some of the high end to give it some nice frequencies there, and if I play the mix here, it sounded a bit flat, so I decided to add a bit of exciter and boosted it around the same frequencies. Exciter just adds a bit of oomph in that area. I then added a limiter. I used one of the presets and edited it, so I turned the gain up a bit more. It was at 2, so I turned it to 2.5. I turned the release up because it was at 25, and I turned the output to +1, and then the look head to 5.9 milliseconds. I then added a compressor, and based on my research, I used some of the research that I learned to help me compress this final mix. Around this area, I found the bass a bit too there wasn't enough bass in this area, so I added a sub bass here and just put kick warmer on it. Halfway through the week, I decided to start mixing song 1. But this was a pretty easy task because it was quite a small little file. I first opened the mixer. I did the same as I did on the track before. I boosted them all up so they were all the same level, and then slowly one by one took them down. I found this is the easiest way to mix for me personally, because you can see straight away that they're all peaking, and then you just turn them down until they're not peaking, and then either add a compressor or add anything that is needed. I found out that it's easier to over compress them, so I decided to take the compressors off most of these and leave them as dry as possible, so it'd give them a natural sound to whatever synth they were. As we can see on each channel, there's either a channel EQ or there isn't. On the EQs here, I've just cut them, and then the same on this one, just to leave some space for other frequencies, especially bass and kick, to come through. On the drums, especially on these, I boosted some of the low and some of the high end, just to give it a bit more stand out in the mix. And I've done here on the Serum, I've cut more than I did, and then just so they each stand out and they don't sound too muddy in the mix. Mixed it, I bounced it down, and I went into the car and I tested it. I also tested it on my hi-fi downstairs and my Alexa, just to find, you know, what kind of speakers or speaker they are going to be listening, the audience is going to be listening through. So I was just checking that the sound quality was best matched for each one. Luckily with Spotify, they have their own, as Tom says in my research, that they have their own compressor, so when coming through Spotify, the mix will sound as best as possible if I upload to Spotify. The hardest part of mixing this track was making different parts sound bigger than the other. I wanted this part to sound bigger than the verse or the intro, and then the drop to sound bigger than the pre-drop. So to battle that, I added different effects. So I added lots of reverb in the actual channel here. So in Serum, as we can see, there's a heavy reverb channel and a compressor, and started to master. First thing in the master, I bounced it all down into one single file and called it Final Mix. I then added a channel EQ, and on the EQ I high cut it by about 10k hertz, and then ducked it around in the middle of about 6,900 hertz, and then ducked it at around 106 to 108 hertz, just a tiny bit to get that nice clean bass sound without having too much bass impact the mix. I then put Exciter on it, which just boosted the frequencies at about 10k hertz and just made it pop a bit more in the high frequencies. Then I added a compressor using the tutorials. I compressed it by about 3:1, and then had 0.5 makeup gain because I didn't want too much makeup gain because it's a final mix, so I'm compressing it. I didn't want it to be too loud or too quiet. I then added stereo spread. Now I don't usually add stereo spread, but in this instance I felt like it was a nice add to the mix. I didn't want to add too much so it sounds wacky or off, so I just touched it with like a bit of salt. So the end of week 9, I felt like I've completed some tasks that needed doing. So I've mixed and mastered 2 songs. Whether they will stay like this, whether I will redo the mastering or mixing, I will decide at a later date, but for now I'm happy with them. I haven't posted anything on my social media again this week, which is definitely, I've definitely lost followers, so I definitely need to post next week, and it just depends what I have to post. Hopefully it will be saying something like I've finally mixed this. From this week I'm definitely going to take away the information that I've learned about mixing and mastering and that I've taught myself. I found it's best to sort of like lightly add different plugins to the mastering channel, and to add and bus reverbs and delays to make the whole system run faster when mixing, because at times I was getting frustrated because it was stopping and it just couldn't handle it. So definitely for next week, when mixing some of my other songs, definitely to put everything for a bus. So it's week 10, and I was meant to be using this week for mixing and mastering some of my other songs, but I found that a couple of months ago I'd started to write a song called Tropical House, and I got to around about where the chorus was, so I decided to quickly finish it, just simply replacing and adding stuff, changing some of the chords around, and I've ended up with this. So I started off with the kalimba, just basic everything that it had on it before. I didn't even touch the buses. I then added a marimba underneath to add some bass to it. And then worked on the lead. And the lead is played on a steel pan with the boosted reverb on the bus and a bit of distortion to it. Then added a snap. And then an African kit maraca, which is a preset from the loop library. I then added a house bass, which is from ES2. I high cut it a tiny bit and then boosted the bass to give it a bit more oomph. Together it sounds like this. I had some backing claps which I took inspiration from the Chainsmokers. snap added. I then added a kick. Now the kick is 2 kicks put together. The one is high and then a low one, which is a sub. And I've cut the frequencies so that they would put together nicely. Together it sounds like this. I then needed a drop before a drop, so I decided to add an acoustic piano in. Now this has got heavy reverb and a lot of EQing, and as you can see it's got a preset EQ that I've messed with. I've just taken a bit more low end out of it, and then I've got a piano low which is boosted in the low and then cut at the high end. I then had some studio time for mixing that I decided to mic up the piano at college and then record the same chords over it with 3 different mics. And together they sound like this. I then added steel pans. Using the same melody but added extra ones to it. Then added a snap. And then some sub bass. With it high cut and boosted a tiny bit. Then for the drop, I added in the house bass again, but also added in a fancy bass, which is a fancy preset I made from the song Fancy by Iggy Azalea. And then some sub bass. I then added a marimba back in with different chords. And then the melody. And then the kick. And claps. Now at this point I felt like it was missing, so I added in a pan flute which I made. It's from EX2's Pop Flute. And this has a low end and a high end, as you can see. House hats. And all together the drop sounds like this. Then for the second verse I added in the chords, but I changed them up so they were different. Everything back in, and then everything is the same until the last bit where it just takes out the pan flute and the lead and leaves everything in for an outro. So it was time to start mixing and mastering Guileless's song with me. We have now named it King of Elephants, as as his album was called King of Elephants, and this is one of his main songs on there. This will also be going on my EP. So I started with the piano. I brung up the mixer, and like I have done for the past mixing, I boosted them all to the top and then slowly brung them down, changing all the reverbs and stuff to buses, except from all the tape delays, because I found once I put them through the bus, the reverb was going on afterwards. I left some of the presets, like the violins, to have the reverb on the channel by themselves, as I wanted them to have the similar reverbs without going through a bus. I then started to automate different areas. So as you can see, the Kickstarter comes in at this point, which based on my research, I invested in. So as you can see, the Kickstarter comes in at this point. And then I wanted it to fade it out by the end to come back in normally. I didn't do any other automation except from on here. I went round different speakers in my house like I've done before and tested them out, making sure there was enough low end and enough high frequencies coming through. I found this difficult on Alexa as there was too much kick, so instead of remixing it, I went into the bounce version and I've deleted it to show you what I did. I took down a tiny bit here and then high cut it a tiny bit, and then took out some frequencies around 1020 hertz, sorry, and then sounded perfect with the kick. I try to sleep, I wanna dream. On summer nights I'm watching the bright stars. As you can see, there isn't much EQing done here. This is the original master. I bounced it 2 times to add different effects and to get all these effects onto this final one. I've added channel EQ. As you can see, I already cut a tiny bit of the bass out and high cut it and took some frequencies out here, but I felt like it needed more. Like I do to all my master tracks, I added some exciter around 20k hertz, a compressor with the same preset that I used before, and then a limiter with the same preset as I used before. This week I did end up posting on social media. I posted a snippet of the song just before the drop. And I got some good responses. People were excited for it. I captioned it, a bit of Tropical House on a Wednesday, anyone. What does everyone think of the writing? The writing was done by my brother, and the picture was taken in Aberdeen by my brother, who has done most of my artwork. He actually did my final artwork, which I've got, which I'll be showing you in the next week. This week I definitely went off plan a tiny bit. I needed to stick with mixing and mastering my final songs, but I'm sort of glad that I ended up finishing off that Tropical House track, because that takes me up to 4 songs. My target was 5, but I'm 1 off, so it's not as bad as before. From this week I'll be taking away that I shouldn't be afraid to reuse old material that I've got to finish off, because it will always end up being either good or bad. It doesn't matter as long as you sort of tried your best. Thankfully it worked out this week that I finished one of my songs that I needed. Now on to next week.